Welcome to the TPN studio. Thank you for joining us in studio today for our third series of Rentbook Training. I am Jade Matembo and I will be facilitating today's session. And with me in studio we have Waylon Wilson, who will be presenting today's session. Welcome, Waylon.
Welcome, Jade. Thank you.
Today we're going to be diving into how to grow and manage your own property portfolio. And as always, I'm going to start off with our house rules. Please make sure you are logged into YouTube so you're able to access and interact on our live chat. Please also don't forget to like and subscribe to the TPN YouTube channel. We're going to make the feedback form available during the Q&A session. Please make sure you are also sending through your questions throughout the session so we can pose it to Waylon, and then we'll have a 15-minute Q&A session right at the end. If we seem a bit blurry this morning, please click on the cog at the bottom of the screen and make sure it's set to a minimum of 720p. On that note, let's get going.
Thank you, Jade. Welcome everyone to today's training session. And we'll be looking at the session today as a landlord, you owning your own property and managing it for yourself. Now, to start off, you need to go to www.rentbook.co.za, and if you're not yet registered, you then click on the Try Now button. Once you click on that button, you then enter your email address, enter passwords, and enter your first name and surname, and then submit. When you click submit, an email will be sent to you to verify that you've used the correct email address. From there, you will then register as a landlord, or you can also register as an agent without commission if you are a landlord that has properties in multiple entities. Now, once registered and signed into the Rentbook system, this is the default screen you'll see. Now, this is called your dashboard, and your dashboard basically gives you an overview of what's happening within your Rentbook account. It tells you if you've got any invoices due, and invoices due becomes available 10 days prior to the invoice due date. Rent due, rent only becomes due once an invoice has been sent. Then bills due, bills that's due to a third party like the municipality or the body corporate. And deposits that's partially held or no deposits held at all. And then a deposit that's held by you as the landlord. And then properties, how many properties you've got. Of those properties, how many properties are occupied or vacant. And then leases, how many leases you've got loaded on the system. Of the leases, how many are active and expired. When a lease becomes expired on Rentbook, it doesn't mean that the lease will automatically terminate. You will have to physically either cancel the lease or extend the lease if need be. Then the system also reminds you if a lease is coming up for renewal in the next 90, 60 or 30 days. Now that's the dashboard. Now on the left we've got My Account, and under My Account this is the information that you entered when you registered on the Rentbook system. It then entails your personal information, email address, contact number, your physical address, as well as your banking details that you want to display on the actual invoices when sending out the invoices to your tenants. Now, we also have properties, leases, vendors, tenants, reports, and all of these we will be going through when we start loading information on the Rentbook system. We also have below reports, we've got settings. And on settings, it then gives you an overview of who you are. You are client number, whatever. You are a landlord, and it gives you your login email address. You also have the option to change your password. Also, you have the option to add users. So if you click on the users tab, if you've got multiple users working on your Rentbook system, you can then click add user. You'll enter the user's email address, first name, surname, and mobile number, and then create user. The user then will receive an email to confirm, and then just change their password. under General, under Invoice Due Parameters, for monthly leases, this is when on your dashboard your invoices becomes invoice due, and it's 10 days prior to the invoice due date. And then invoice period parameters. Now the invoice period parameters I'll go in depth a bit later when we set up your invoices that's ready to send. But this basically opens the period from the 10th of the previous month to the 7th of the current month, meaning for September your invoices to be ready to send will open on the 10th of August till the 7th of September. And then invoice. Now the invoice primary colors are set to blue and black, but you can change it to whatever colors you want. And then the default logo on our RentBook system is the TPN RentBook logo. But if you do have a logo, you can then add your logo on the invoices that get sent out to the respective tenants. So you just click on choose file, click on where the logo is stored, okay, and then upload file, and your logo will appear each and every invoice that gets sent to the tenants. RPP, which is rental payment profile parameters, and the default settings when registering for RentBook are set as such: no grace amount and no grace days. If you want to set a grace amount, which means if a tenant short pays by a certain amount that you've set on the RentBook system, the tenant's payment profile will not be negatively affected when fed through to the TPN system. And then grace days, these are the days that you give the tenants to pay. So if a tenant's payment due date is the 1st and you want to give them grace days, let's say 3 grace days. So if the tenant hasn't paid by the 3rd of the month, anything after the 3rd will be paid late. So the tenant has got the 1st, the 2nd and the 3rd to pay their rent on time. Once you've changed the rental payment profile parameters, you then click Save RPP settings, and these will affect each and every tenant lease on the system. Then last but not least, TPN account. Now if you are a TPN Credit Bureau Combined RentBook member, you can then link your information from RentBook to TPN, which means you enter your TPN login code, your password provided by TPN, confirm your password, click test and save. Once you click test and save, the bureau notifications will pop up where it gives you a TPN agency code, and you will have to choose a notify option. You can either choose send SMSs to tenants or do not send SMSs, do not notify tenants. Now we extract the information from RentBook on the 5th, the 10th and the 20th, and if you've chosen that tenants receive an SMS, they will receive an SMS that says, thank you for paying your rent on time, or credit alert, you have not paid your rent as yet. Or we can upload the information without SMSs, whereby the payment profile will be then shown as paid on time, paid late and partial payments, but they will not receive any SMSs. And for these SMSs sent to tenants, there's no charge involved at all. Once you've chosen the option, you then click save, and your information will then feed through automatically from the RentBook system to TPN Credit Bureau. Then lastly, on the menu on the left hand side, there is a Help section where it gives you a few video tutorials on how to use the RentBook system. Okay, before we start, Jade, are there any questions?
No questions at this stage,
Okay,
Raven.
thank you, Jade. Now, you can start off anywhere on the system. If you are registered as a credit bureau member, you can perform your credit checks directly from the RentBook system. The first thing that you need to do is then load your tenants on RentBook. So you click on Tenants, add a tenant, and the tenant type defaults to a consumer, but if this is a business, you can then change the tenant type. You'll then enter the tenant's details. tenant's ID number, you also add the tenant's email address and then contact number as well. You can also add the tenant's current address on the system, where they are currently staying. Okay, so once you've entered the tenant's information, you can then click Create Tenant. Now, when you click Create Tenant, the tenant is created, and at this particular point is where you can perform a credit check directly from on the RentBook system on the tenant. So you can click on the Credit Checks tab, or at the bottom it shows Credit Check, no credit check on file, Update Credit Check, and it then asks you to confirm or enter your TPN Credit Bureau password. So you'll enter the password. And you can say remember login and remember password, and then log in. When you click log in, it then redirects you to the TPN Credit Bureau system. And at this particular point is where you can complete the credit check, and it will give you the result that you can either place the tenant or not. Now, once you've run the credit check, you can now go and load the property on the system and perform and place the tenant. Sorry for that. Okay, so we've now loaded the tenant as an applicant. So now we can go and load the property and link the tenant to the actual property. So we can click on the Properties tab, add a property, and we can add the property where the tenant is going to reside in. Now, when you click on properties, you enter the property address on the actual maps. Once you've chosen the actual property address, it then pre-populates the address for you on the actual address tab. Under bank account, we've got the option to add a set of banking details. Now, when registering for RentBook, it automatically asks you to enter the banking details you want the tenants to use when they pay their rent in. Now, you only click on Add Bank Account if you want this particular tenant to use a different set of banking details. So let's say you've got different entities and you've got one RentBook profile. You can then say Add Bank Account, and a separate set of banking details will then appear on only this particular tenant's invoices that get sent out. Now, the property category is defaulted to residential, and you'll then choose what type of property you'll be loading, how many bedrooms the property has, and the building size is not a mandatory field, but if you do have the building size, please enter the correct information in there. Jade, yes?
Hi, Waylon. We have a question from Nadia Kruger. She's saying, just to make sure, a tenant needs to give permission for a credit check.
Yes, a tenant needs to give permission. So there is a consent form that the tenant fills in, and you then perform the credit check once the tenant has given you permission to do that. Now, once you've entered the information of the property, you then click Create Property, and the property is created as simple as that. Now, if this particular property is not yet been, it's empty and you want to advertise the property, at this particular point is where you can physically go and advertise the property. So you can click on the Advertise tab, and you'll then enter, this is a 3-bedroom house for rent, and you'll enter a description. You'll enter the display person, so the actual contact person, contact number, email address, what the advertised rental is for this particular property, when it is available from, so let's say it's available from September, residential house, it's got the bedroom, bathroom, then you can choose how many garages it has, the size, if it has a swimming pool, private garden, electric fence, alarm, are pets allowed, and then save advert. Once you click save advert, it gives you then the option to add pictures. So you click on edit images. You choose where these images are stored. So you'll click on the images, upload file, and you'll need to upload each individual image, an upload file. Once you've done that, you then say upload file and then cancel, so the images are there, and at this particular point all the information is ready for you, and then you can click publish now, and this ad will be published on our RentBay website, which is free for you. Now once you've then have an inquiry, you then perform the credit check on the prospective tenant, and at this particular point is where you can go and place the actual tenant. Any questions, Jade?
We do have a question from Matsi Mukaleki. They're asking, where do we get the consent form from, firstly? And what happens if the tenant does not allow the landlord to do the credit check?
Okay, so the consent form you get from our, you can inquire from our help desk and they can email it through to you. And if you can answer the question, what happens on that, Jade, from a legal perspective?
Okay, from a legal perspective, if the tenant is not allowing the landlord to do a credit check, you cannot perform the credit check without consent, and we would never suggest that you place a tenant without first performing a credit check, because you need to know in terms of their affordability, if they are able to afford the property, and you need to know how they pay their accounts. So you don't want to put yourself or your landlord at risk by placing a delinquent tenant. So I would say if the tenant is not giving consent to perform a credit check, you should treat it as a red flag and maybe move on to the next applicant.
Thank you, Jade.
Pleasure.
Okay, so now we've loaded a property, we've loaded a tenant, we've performed a credit check on the actual tenant, and if this tenant then passes the credit check, we can now go and link a lease to the prospective tenant. So when you click on tenants, you will see that it defaults the tenants by active tenants, but we have an applicant, so we click on there and we then select applicants, and now we can go and select this tenant. The tenant passed the credit check, so we can now go and accept the tenant. So we'll say accept tenant, and then we'll select for which property this tenant is being selected. When we select the property, it takes us to the lease details, when this lease is starting or did start. So we'll say this lease is going to start on the 1st of September, and rent is due monthly. The rent due day is the 1st, and the monthly rental is 8,900, and the first invoice is then for the 1st of September. Then next. And the next step is, what deposit do we require from this tenant when this tenant is moving in? Is it equal to 1 month rental, 1.5 months, 2 months, or a custom deposit? Now, all of the above, no deposit, 1 month, 1.5 months, and a 2 months rental is pretty straightforward. Now, a custom deposit is a deposit where you bill a tenant a 1 month damage deposit plus a key deposit. Plus a utilities deposit. So let's say the total deposit that we require from this particular tenant is 11,900 rand, and we've now established that we want 11,900. We then go next, And the next step is where it says this is the deposit that will be billed to the actual tenant. The full amount of 11,900, but we want it shown separately. We want it itemized. We are invoicing the tenant for a key deposit, a utilities deposit, and a damage deposit. So at this particular point is where we can itemize the deposits. So you can click edit, and I like to name my deposit damage deposit, and my damage deposit is 8,900 Rand. Save and close, and we add another deposit due item, and this one is key deposit of 1,000 Rand, and last but not least, add another deposit due item, and this is a utilities deposit of 2,000 Rand. Save and close. Now this is how the deposit will be shown on the invoice. Once happy, we can then click create lease, and your lease is created as simple as that. Any questions, Jade?
I have 2 questions for you, Waylon.
Okay.
We have a question from Marika Grobler. She asks, how often do you advise credit checks be updated for tenants?
For tenants, once a year, because anything can change upon lease renewal, once a year.
Yes, that's perfect. And then I have a question from Nadia Kruger. She says with their units, the body corporate only sends the levy statement on the 28th or the 29th. Is it a problem if I send the invoice on the 29th or the 30th?
No, there's no problem, but there is an alternative. You can send the invoice, let's say by the 20th with just the rent, and you can send an alternative invoice with only the utilities. Okay, but if Nadia can contact me, I'll be glad to show her how to do that. Okay.
Thanks, Waylon.
Okay, so once the lease is loaded, okay, if this is a shared lease, husband, wife, brother, sister, we can at this particular point add the second tenant on here. So on the far right of the tenant's name, there's add tenant, and this basically just asks, are we sure that we want to add this tenant to this particular lease? We then click confirm, and it asks us to add a new tenant because we haven't added the tenant on the system as yet. So we'll click add new tenant, and the start date is also the 1st of September, and we'll enter the tenant's details. And you either enter the tenant's passport or ID number. The tenant's email address. The tenant's telephone number. Once you've entered all the information for this particular tenant, you then click Save Changes, and the second tenant will then also be loaded on the system. Yes, Jade?
Question from Mbakisi Moyo. When creating a lease for tenants you already have on another system, how do you capture their current arrears?
Okay, so it depends solely on you. If you're starting to use RentBook, you've got 2 options. When you load the lease, you enter the original lease date, okay? And you will then have to decide whether you want the history shown on the RentBook system. So if you get to the lease terms, so let's just quickly go there. Okay, it won't show now. Upon setting up of the lease, there's a lease term, so you'll enter the original lease start date, and your first invoice date, you then need to set it as when the lease started. If you want the history, you then need to then send an invoice each month. So you'll send an invoice for January 2021, capture a payment for January 21, send an invoice for February until you get up to date. Or you can just start invoicing on the RentBook system from the current invoicing period, and on TPN Credit Bureau, just going to update the tenant's payment behavior and how they've paid. Okay, so now we've loaded the tenant, we can now go and pay or invoice the tenant. Okay, so to invoice your tenants, you click on the leases tab and it will bring up all your leases that you've loaded on the system. You then select that specific lease that you want to invoice and you click on the financials tab. When you're on the financials tab, we've got statement current invoice, and below that it gives you a current invoice with the date, which tells you for which month the invoice is for, and you can then click edit and it takes you to the actual current invoice. You will see it tells you who the invoice will be addressed to, gives you the property address, invoice number, due date, and it also gives you a payment reference number. Now the payment reference number is the reference number that the tenants are already using, or the reference number you want them to use when they pay their rent into your account. So you can click on the payment reference number, change the payment reference number, and the reference number will remain that way until the lease expires or you cancel the lease on the system. So you then click save, and when you click save, it saves the reference number. Now on the actual invoice, we've got the damage deposit, key deposit, and the rent due. We can now go and add additional expenses on the actual system. So we can say add charge, the charge type. Under type, we've got three main types. One type is fees raised. Now under fees raised, those are the charges that we bill to the tenant, which is admin fee, bank fee, collection fee. And then vendor charges, these are charges that we bill to the tenant if we are going to pay it over to our vendors. And under other charges, those are just other charges that we use. But the most charges that we'll be using, the types that we'll be using is under fees raised and other charges. Now in this particular case, we are loading a contract or lease fee to the tenant. So you'll click on under fees raised admin fee, the date, and you can say admin fee, contract fee, lease fee, whatever the fee is that we are charging to the tenant, and the amount that we are charging the tenant for the admin, lease, or contract fee, and then add charge. Okay. Now just below the actual address, we've got a not actioned yet. So if we click on the drop down there, you'll see there is ready to send, waiting for expenses, not yet actioned, requires urgent attention. Now you can set, so if you've got loads of invoices on the RentBook system, you can set your invoices as ready to send. And when you go to your dashboard, it will bring up all your invoices that you've marked as ready to send, and you can send all your invoices at once. Now, if you click on the drop down, it brings up ready to send, and this will be a once-off ready to send. But if you want your invoices to be set monthly as ready to send, you can click on the set default state, and you can set them as ready to send. Now remember earlier when I set up, when we went on the settings tab, we had the, let's just go there quickly. We had the general invoice period parameters. This is where I've explained where the period opens from the 10th of the previous month till the 7th of the current month. For your invoices, if you set your invoices as ready to send, your invoices will appear on the 10th of August till the 7th of September for September under ready to send. Okay, you can go and change these dates to whatever date you want them to appear under ready to send. Now, I advise if your invoices remain the same each and every month, you can then set them under default as ready to send, okay? Or you can set them for waiting for expenses. It depends on you. Now, once we've added all the charges on the actual invoice, below the total due amount, we've got add note. Now, if you click on add note, we've got two note types. One is a global note. Now, global note is a note that you can load on one invoice, and it will appear on all the invoices for all the leases. Like, please note, we will be closed from the 15th of December till the 4th of January. And then notes will be then specific to this particular tenant. Please note your rental increase as of the 1st of October or September, and it will only appear on this particular tenant's invoice. Then save, and then note will appear on the tenant. And then at the bottom is the deliver invoice to. So when you send the invoice will then be delivered to the tenant's email address, of which the tenant also receive an SMS with outstanding rental amount. And then we've got the option to send the invoice. And before we send the invoice, you can also go and preview the invoice. So you'll say preview. And when you preview, this is how the invoice looks. So when happy, you can then go and send the invoice. So you click send invoice, and it just gives you confirmation. Are you sure that you want to send this invoice? So you click OK, and the invoice is then sent to the tenant. The tenant receives a copy of the invoice via the email. You in turn also receive a copy of the invoice via email, and the tenant receives an SMS with the outstanding amount that needs to be paid. Any questions, Jade?
Waylon, I do have a question from Nadia Kruger, but I do think we may have to take this question offline just because we need a few clarifying questions. I will pose it to you, and then if there's anything else we need, she can just contact us. So she's saying we had a rental agent, but we are doing our own rentals now. Everyone gave permission to the agent to pay their deposit over to our account except one tenant. She wants to keep her deposit with the agent. Do we have any advice for her? Okay, no problem.
Okay, so now we've invoiced the tenant. Tenant has paid. We can now go and capture the payment the tenant has made. So on the tenant's financials, we can click add payment. We then enter the date the tenant paid, how the tenant paid, and then a payment description. Then the same payment reference number the tenant uses, we can enter there, which is their payment reference number, and then we enter the amount the tenant paid. So once we've entered all the payment information, we then click save payment, and then save allocations. Okay, so now the tenant, we've invoiced the tenant, tenant pays us, we now need to go and pay our bills. So we go pay the municipality or we go pay the body corporate, and in order for us to do that, we need to go and load a vendor. So if we click on vendors, we then click on add a vendor, and we now need to go and enter the vendor details. The vendor type defaults to a consumer, but if the vendor is a business, we then select business. You then enter the vendor's details. Okay, the registration number for the vendor is not mandatory. You can enter the contact person in there, but you can only enter the business and the trading as name. That's sufficient. So once you've entered the vendor's details, you then click create vendor, and your vendor is created. The only thing that you need to now do is just specify which classification the vendor falls under. So you click under classification add, and because this is a municipality, this falls under vendor, under municipal, and then save, and your vendor is loaded. As simple as that. Yes, Jade?
Waylon, we have a question from Gerda Marks. Is there an option to print an invoice to be hand delivered to the tenant?
Okay, so yes. So you first need to go and send the invoice, unfortunately. Okay. Once the invoice is sent, so you'll go to the actual lease, financials, And next to the invoice that has been sent, you click on View, and you download the invoice, and you can print it from there. Okay.
I have one more question for you from
Yes.
Marika Grobler.
Yeah.
Are the payment options loaded automatically, or do we have an option to upload our own payment options? This is applicable to when you capture a payment from a tenant.
Okay, so the payment options are there. There's no other option that you can use. So when you say add payment, these are the options: EFT, debit order, cash, SnapScan, Bookshaw, and other. If she can maybe email us what other payment options there are, we can speak to IT and see if they can add them on the system. But you cannot add your own payment option on the system.
Thanks, Waylon.
Okay, so now we've invoiced the tenant, we've captured the tenant's payment. We now need to go and pay the municipality. So if you go to vendors, to that specific vendor, financials, and now we're going to click on capture bill. We'll then select the property for the bill, and because we are landlord, we do not have to recover this expense from the tenant. We've already invoiced the tenant for this. We choose the type, which is utilities, the date on the actual municipal statement, and then we'll add here whatever the description is. Then we'll enter the total amount for the bill, and then save bill. Once the bill is saved, we can now go and pay the bill. So we'll say pay bill, and we can click pay now, the date we physically paid the bill, how we made payment for the bill, and then a description. And then the reference number, you can just use the municipal account number and then save payment. And that's how you raise the bill for the vendor and also pay the bill on the system. Okay. Question?
I do have a question for you, Waylon. Please do keep your questions coming. So Mbakisi Moyo is asking, if the tenant pays the invoice over 3 payments, does it have effect?
The invoice over 3 payments. Meaning, so there's a 2-part answer to the question. There's one, if the tenant pays the rent in 3 parts by the 1st of September, okay, the tenant's payment behavior will be paid on time. If the tenant pays, let's say, his deposit on the 11th of August, and he pays the half of the rent by the 1st of September, and he pays the other half by the 7th or whatever date after the payment due date, the tenant's payment due date payment profile will be paid late. Okay? That's the 2 options. But on the Rentbook system, you can capture the payments as they came in. So you've invoiced the tenant 21,300, and the tenant's paid on the 10th of August, and the tenant paid the 15th of August and the 1st of September. You can then capture the payments as such. You don't have to make capture one payment on the system. Okay. So now we've run through those, and then I just need to show you how to do bulk capturing. So if you've got multiple units that you want to load, multiple expenses that you want to load on the system. So on the vendor, you can go to the vendor financials, bulk capture, and you've got capture bills. So we'll capture, you'll click on the utilities and the date. And here you can say City of Joburg, or whatever description you want to add in there. And then you'll choose all active properties, and you can then enter the bill amount. So this property, the bill is that amount, and that one is that, and then save bills. So the bills are saved on the system. We've captured the bulk bills. Now we can go and pay them as well. Still under financials, recurring bills, bulk capture payments. So now we can capture the payments, and we then just enter the amounts that we've paid. Save. So this saves you time on doing them one by one. You can then bulk capture for all your properties on the actual system. Okay, and that's it from me. Are there any questions, Jade?
I just have one question from Nadia Kruger. She's asking, if a tenant pays cash at the bank, who pays the cash deposit fees? Is it the tenant or the landlord?
Okay, I think that's a legal question, Jade.
No problem, I'll take that one. So in terms of the cash deposit fees, if your lease agreement stipulates that cash deposit fees is for the tenant's account, then you can charge it to the tenant. Like the TPN residential lease pack, all our lease agreements stipulate that any bank charges is for the tenant's account. But if your lease agreement is silent in that regard, it is then for the landlord's account. Okay, so we're just going to give it a few minutes for any last questions, and we are going to be posting the feedback form now.
Okay, please also remember to like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. And thank you so much for joining today, and hope you, if you've got any further questions, please feel free to contact support@rentbook.co.za, and we'll be glad to assist you for future questions that you might have. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Jade.
We have no further questions.